Welcome back to the Rabbit Trails podcast, everybody. I'm your host, Barrett Harkins, together with Garrick Regner in Spain. Hope you're doing well today. Hey, man, how's it going?
I'm doing good. How's it going? It's good to be on the Iberian Peninsula. As always,
life is always good on the Iberian Peninsula. At least always a fiesta. Anyway,
yeah, there's always something to celebrate.
Hey, do you guys have like in Andalusia do they mark like the beginning of a festival, market day, the beginning of a afternoon coffee with by sending up like noisemaker fireworks like in the middle of the day?
That does happen on certain things. Yes, that does happen.
So it basically sounds like a war zone around here on a daily basis, because pretty much for everything, Galicia sends them up and there's explosions. Specifically on the weekends is mostly because there's lots of market days and different stuff like that. But we can hear
it's just loud bangs, right? Because because
it's
not
fireworks without
you
the
goes at
color.
night because you want to see the. But yeah, no, we have days, certain things. I don't know why. One time I went to Fias, the first day of Fias with some mutual friends of ours, and it was I was like, and literally thousands of people packed the main square, and someone said something, and then we were there for like maybe 20-30 minutes, and then all these bangs went off for like it must have been 10 minutes, or just pop, 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 and just really loud. And then it ended and everyone left. And so I was like, what was the, like, why did we do that? And they're like, oh, I don't know. It's just what we do. It's just loud, everyone together. And everyone went to have lunch, and it was like a big party scene. Everyone was out in the street, drinking beers, having fun. But it was, so there is something about I don't know exactly, but yes, a lot of Spain does that just loud noises. And then we're like, okay, it's begun. Something has begun.
I'm not sure,
or something has ended, maybe.
Yeah, something. Well, they do it at the beginning and the end of every market, and so like here, in particular, because they're so of the registered, like not municipalities, but registered living spaces, villages. But there's even something even smaller than a village in Galicia that isn't. It's unique to Galicia. So of those registered in Spain in total, 50% of them are actually in Galicia because there's actually water here, as opposed to the rest of Spain, which water is centralized to a few small places and everyone congregates around that water, right? But here there's water everywhere. So then the population is a lot more dispersed in Galicia as opposed to,
more, it's a little bit more rural.
Right.
Yeah, I think Galicia.
And so you'll have these really small villages that will have a market day, and they send up fireworks at the beginning and the end. Problem is where I live, I can hear for literally kilometers and kilometers. I can hear 15, 20. Villages. So it's like all day long on Saturday and Sunday, boom, 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 boom. And then, someone's having a birthday party, boom, 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 boom. Someone's, ending their birthday party, boom, boom, boom. So literally
noise.
Yeah. And there's millions of dogs in Galicia too. So it's like dogs are just barking. They all start barking. Anyway.
That's one thing. When I've been, you got to get used to on the Camino, you got to get used to the barking dog. That's like if you stay in Albergay in a town. If you stay in the city, you don't notice it, but
once you hit Galicia, it's just an incredible amount of noise. I've grown used to it.
You get used to it. I don't even notice. Sometimes people are like, "What's that sound?" I'm like, "What?" Like, you just want to hear that loud. I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's that's this." You just get used to it. When we first moved to Spain, we lived across the street from the main, not the cathedral, but one of the main churches where the Virgin, like the Patrona, the patron saint of Granada, which is the Mary of Anguish. And so in September, every day, every 3 hours or 2 hours, can't remember, the bells, right, and this is right across from our house, would go off, just bells going off, but not just like ding dong. It was like bum 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 bum. It was like ringing bells, and then so they're letting people know it's time to pray or go to mass or whatever, And so, but it was super loud. I remember our when we had just moved into this place this September, and Tina are like, "What?" And our landlord's like, "Oh, it's just in September." It's just then they shoot off fireworks like the last night of September. They shoot off fireworks right outside our house for like 15 minutes at midnight, so your kids are in bed. Like the first time it happened, our kids were all sleeping, and all of a sudden, pop, it's like a war zone because they're literally shooting fireworks off right outside our, and it's just it's so loud. Or, but after a couple of that, because you so used to the first few days of September, you're like, but after days of that, you don't even hear it anymore. You just go on. You're like, okay, tonight's the fireworks. Yeah, tonight's the fireworks. Kids will sleep through it probably. It's a loud country.
I will say it is quite nice though where I live. So we love the life, the hum of life in town, right? So the chaos, the life chaos that is the center of any given Spanish city. We love it. Everyone going out for drinks or food or whatever. And when we go to town, we're always like, oh man, I kind of wish we lived a little bit outside of town, and some, you've been here, but for those who haven't been at my place, in a nice little green patch of Galicia. And anyway, so we go into town where I was like, maybe we should have just lived in town. This is great. And then we'll come home and we'll be sitting out on our covered porch, and we're kind of like, oh no, this is nice. We're kind of like, oh, this is why we live here. And so we kind of have the best of both worlds because we're only like a 7-minute drive from downtown. So it's
you're becoming very Spanified, I can tell, because the fact that when we go into town, when you're I mean, it's not like driving from Terrell to Dallas. That like in America you go, ooh, time to go to town. Or you literally live 7 minutes from downtown,
right?
Santiago. Like you can get in your car, you can walk it in like what, half an hour maybe.
Yeah, it takes about 40 minutes.
Yeah. Which in Spain is it's a pretty short walking distance.
It's normal.
It's normal. So, but that's
great.
You're starting to sound like Spaniards who live outside of the city. Because we have friends who live in the towns of Granada, which are right across the highway. So the bus don't go everywhere in part of the city bus system per se, and there's just mental block of like, even though I can literally walk under the highway bypass bridge and I'm in the city. But I'm in the pueblos. We're way out far in the pueblos. And like, you are, but not really. You're not.
Well, that's one of the interesting things about Spain is that all cities are so dense. Yeah. And so you'll have just this massive, like really compact, dense urban area. And then all of a sudden it's like, and then it ends and then it's country.
Yeah.
Unless Spain you're in Galicia and every now and then there's a village, right? But other than that.
Yeah. But no, Spain has a lot of empty space.
Yeah.
So Spain, I looked it up because
it's kind of like my brain. A lot of empty space.
It was a little bit of a little of a pet peeve I had with some people who kept saying, Spain doesn't have big cities or something about cities in Spain. I can't remember what the beef was, but I looked it up, and Spain is the most urbanly dense. So it's not on paper as a whole country, it's not that densely populated, right?
Right.
Because you have these massive
spaces with
nothing, very few people. But when you say of urban density, it's the most urban dense country I think in the world. And actually you have the most dense square kilometer in the world in a city in Barcelona. They have something like 50,000 people in a square kilometer. I mean, it's is
that counting tourists? Because isn't Barcelona like one of those crazy places where it's like on any given day there's more tourists?
There's a lot of tourists
who live there.
I don't think it's counting tourists. It's counting actual citizens. Yeah, so because Barcelona is not a big city, very small, very packed, a lot of people who live there. And then you have the roundabouts. We talk about Barcelona proper. So, but the same with Granada. I mean, Granada, you can walk from the bottom to the north, the south to north, in about an hour and a half. It's not big, but there's 500,000 people packed into that.
Right.
That space. Or maybe 300,000, but it's the cities are small, but they're packed full of people. Spaniards like to be close to others.
They enjoy being close on people. I think part of that might have come from the Middle Ages when you were often attacked, and it just makes sense, right? And then part of it is just Spanish,
the culture.
Spanish culture and desire for community and not being alone and all of those things. Yeah. Spain is a fascinating place. We're enjoying being here. It's fantastic. I mean, goodness gracious, Galicia. Love you.
Full surprises.
Never a dull day. Never a dull day.
Yeah. Well, we had an actual write-in from John Main, our friend in Australia from down under.
Good day, mate.
I
shouldn't have said that. No,
that's right. He thinks we're funny. But he was wanting to if we would talk about or at least think about the so about it was about 3 or 4 maybe 5 years ago, I don't remember, a young guy, kind of I guess a missionary. I don't think he was necessarily sent by anyone, but he was kind of an independent, but he really felt God calling him and to go to the Andaman Islands, which is part of India, and this one island called Sentinel Island, and there's these people there that are Sentinelese who are, for the most part, still pretty cut off from the world. They have and the idea was to share the gospel, and he went, and I think everyone probably knows he was killed. He was killed by these natives, and so I think there's that. I remember when it happened. If you remember, I mean, there's a lot of questioning. It was one of the things that also a lot of people, see missionaries are bad or whatever, the kind of the typical, which is another topic we sometimes talk about, and maybe we should talk about a little in another podcast. But there's a lot of ethical arguments kind of all around this, and obviously we're limited in knowing exactly his motivation and exactly. I mean, we have to, I think, take him at his word at some level. He wanted to share the gospel with these people, and so there's obviously an ethical side of this from a Christian standpoint, and an ethical side of this from a non-Christian standpoint. Like how does this all play out? So I remember it being a little bit of a bomb in our circles, or like what does this mean? How do we talk about this? How do we think about this? And there's a lot of stuff wrapped up in it. So a little bit more background, as I understand, is the Sentinelese people have been contacted, so they're not totally, so they're aware there's something outside their world, but they have been very clear that they don't want to be involved in that. They don't, obviously don't know exactly what it is. And there's been some anthropologists who could try to go in there and do a little bit of, contact, and they've been given things, but they have been particularly violent. I think there was another case maybe 10, 15 years ago, them maybe longer, I don't remember, killing some fishermen who had accidentally washed up on shore. Their boat had sprung a leak or something like that, and so they were killed. So they're particularly violent or protective of their land. So, but we don't know a ton about them and stuff. So one of the people groups or tribes in the world, and they're one of them. So what do we do with that? There's a lot of angles there, obviously.
I look to your wisdom. Yeah, it's interesting because I remember when that happened. So just full disclosure here, I have not thought about this at great length for quite some time. But I mean, I remember when it happened, and I remember the discussion. I don't remember if it was on Twitter or Facebook or where it was, but it seemed to me to be a decidedly Twitter-like conversation. A lot of heat and very little, substance. But I think, it brings up a very important question as to, okay, so here you have a dude who, so I guess there's two ways we could think about this. What is the necessary or value in making sure, what kind of responsibility do we have as believers to make sure that, like, people groups like this who have had very little contact or continue to have very little contact are contacted and have an opportunity to understand the gospel? So that's question one, and I think that's probably great. I think it's probably the more important question.
Mm-hmm.
The second question is this dude, and then when you feel compelled that God's telling you to do something, do you follow it? So on the one hand, as a believer, And then there's probably subsets of questions there of like, is that the best way to have done it? Does God actually call those people? What's the wisdom of doing that on your own? This, that, and the other thing.
Yeah.
And
that's a bit separate. He is intention from the overall question at large of what do you do about,
yeah. So I mean, as far as
that's a good point.
The second question of, and the subsets of questions of this guy Chow, I don't know. I mean, did God call him? Was God telling him to do that? I don't know. I believe in a perfect judge that's got that figured out already. So
yeah.
So I can't really tell you. I'll say this. Let's say that because a lot of people go, well, he should have gone with an organization, or he should have done this, or he should have done that. I think it's pretty safe to say that at this point, that had they sent in a very, let's say, well-trained peacekeeping delegation, the same thing might have happened, because this tribe is of a particular, violent disposition. Maybe not. So that to me just feels like, okay, we're trying to answer something we're not qualified to answer.
Yeah.
So then I personally, I'm maybe a little bit more interested in the first question of what do we do in situations? Is it our responsibility? Do we need to go? And I think the answer is, for me personally, is we as believers, we're supposed to take the gospel to the other ends of the earth, and that's an end of the earth that hasn't yet been actualized and reached. And to some extent, it may require sacrifice of people. I don't say that lightly to say like, hey, people who we need people to sign up to die, or we need, like, we go in bloodthirsty martyrs. Like, I don't think that. I think there's probably ways to think through different things. We could probably do it in a way that over time that would be maybe more systematic, and maybe more profitable. But I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm going to stop there because I have a few other thoughts, but I'm long-winded.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you in the core theory that we are called to go and share the gospel, share Christ's love, and I do know that making contact, and I think there's obviously enough history there of other organizations that do work with tribes and go into tribes, and I think I don't think it's necessarily a question of yes or no. It's a question of how do you really how do you go about doing that in the best possible way? Because obviously there's some issues. There's issues of maybe bringing in disease. At the same time, I have a hard time conceiving that we wouldn't be able to go in and protect people from disease. Obviously, now if they're violent, obviously it's a very difficult situation because you can't go in and just start giving, what are those things called? Vaccines, which would prolong life. So I think on that side of things, I think from a purely theological standpoint, yes, we're called to do that. I think we're called to do it in the best possible way, with the best and knowing what we know, because we're also in a very different time in world missions. We have a lot of data points, a lot of experience, a lot of failures, a lot of successes, and we have this ability to know a lot more than we did maybe 100 years ago or 50 years ago, and you just kind of had to go in and do your best. And figure things out. So I think my guess is there's probably some people in the mission field who have thought, not in the mission field, but in missions, who've thought about these things and deeply, and how do you approach a particularly violent or a group that doesn't want contact. But so I think you do. I think also there's a flip side of this of like, we don't know what their day-to-day lives are like, and so there's a little bit of assumption, but it's based in some reality that no contact is better because their life is now pristine, or paradisical. I don't think that's something many experts in this would say. They would assume that yes, that this tribe struggles probably with all kinds of issues, and that if they had access to certain things, their lives would improve. But that's not a guarantee, and that's not but I think there's a general overall weird narrative in a lot of Western thinking that if you can just leave people alone, it's the best thing for them. And
it's a little, and it's actually a little bit of it's kind of arrogant. I don't know.
It is arrogant. It's incredible. Well, and this is something I want to get into
not the right
future
word.
Conversations about missions. How even in this reticence of missions is an incredible arrogance in itself, where we continue to put a narrative on other people's and do not let them make their own decisions about how they interact with the world, right? We say, no, you have to now interact the way the world we want you to, because we feel guilt about it, or we think we feel guilt about it. So yeah, I agree. There's incredible arrogance. And a lot of people are starting to point that out. Now, obviously, if this tribe is saying, well, we don't want any contact, that's a very complicated, situation,
we don't want any contact, or I mean, yeah, may very well, but yeah, I mean, it's right. There's a million different things that it could be. Obviously, they don't want any contact. That's probably a safe assumption. But
do all of them want? That's another question.
Right,
do all of them would not want that contact. Yeah.
Right. Or is it like one leader has a stranglehold and has cast fear, and I mean, there's just a million different things that could be. I think, and I think we need to consider all that. So, yeah, you make a great point in the idea that this, there are organizations out there who really have worked with and thought about these things for a long time, probably would have been at the very least. So for those out there who are young missionaries who want to go and do, let's say, crazy in a good way, but crazy new stuff, seek wisdom.
Yeah.
Right. So that's idea, or important thing number one is, look, there probably are people who've thought about or had experience with, and there's nothing better that a missionary can do, especially a young missionary, than attach himself to wisdom of those who've gone before.
Yeah.
Too often in the young, impetuous nature of youth, we want to praise that because we like the going, we like the ambition, but we also allow them to completely disconnect themselves from wisdom, and that's not good. And that's irresponsible of us, that's irresponsible of them. So being attached to wisdom is a very important thing, always. But I mean, I do think eventually I think it is a good and necessary thing that we as believers are looking to and interacting with people groups who don't know the gospel, right? Mm-hmm. If ultimately what we believe, I think this is where I get frustrated, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, I think it's important to remember some things at which we believe. Number one, this Jesus dude's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
Like if what we believe is God created the world a certain way, that world is fallen, then he set into motion, or not then, but time before that, set into motion a plan of redemption in which his son is inextricably intertwined, and is the climax of that. His son will ultimately redeem and return to reign. And through him, we have forgiveness of sins and hope of eternal life. Those aren't small. That's what mission is based off of, right? So it's not like it's not like we're espousing the glories of the Texas Rangers or the eminence of Barcelona football team. That's small potatoes. And look, if Real Madrid or Madrid doesn't want to root for Barcelona, then so be it. Who cares? That's not an important thing. Those are inconsequential to overall life things. And so we should be okay with that when someone says, look, I don't want to have anything to do with that. We should also be okay with the fact that, look, there's going to be people who reject Christ. That's not necessarily up to us. The problem that I have is when we as believers want to make little of what we believe, because we're either comfortable with what we believe and we're assured of salvation, but secondly, it makes us uncomfortable to think that some people might be uncomfortable with the message that we're ultimately bringing.
Yeah.
And I think we have to remember what we believe is kind of a big deal. And if what we believe is true, then it has consequences, and it should push us to want to spread that good news. I mean, if it really is good news, if the gospel is good news, then it's for everyone in all times and all places. So then we have to be about going to take that to them, obstacles notwithstanding.
And I think we don't impose this barrier or this impediment on anyone else. Now, I mean, no one's going, well, the Democratic Party that they have solutions problem. No one's going, well, they shouldn't tone it, obviously you don't like the other people's message, but you understand that they're passionate about something and they feel that it will make the world better. Of course, they're, no one's holding it against them that they're trying to tell other people about their plan for saving the American experiment or whatever it may be. But so for some reason, we seem to get really kind of worked up about, ooh, well, that's really, negative to go out. Penn Jillette, Penn and Teller, the magicians, he's an atheist, but I saw him make a point where he said, no, if you believe that this is true, that Jesus died and rose again, he's saving all of humanity and he's bringing, and life is better with him and everything will be better with him, then it's absurd that you wouldn't share that with me. He goes, and actually I'm offended when Christians aren't, sharing it. He also made a point because you can tell when people do it out of love versus, just to get through something or tell something, or because they actually have a secret agenda on the backside. But I think, he made that point, like, and I've seen that other theologians, like, if this is important, why are we scared to, I think we're sometimes scared because there's, there's a lot of different reasons. So I don't want to go into all those, but we should be, well, this is important. This is important stuff. It's important news. And I think the key is, are we doing that in love? Right. Because when we believe that this is so, which is I think a shift in evangelism that often we have to make, is it's not about checklists. It's not about feeling good about ourselves. It's because we love people. We see God's people through his eyes, or we try to, and we understand that evangelism, telling other people about it, is an act of love. It's not an act of propaganda. It's not an act of growing a movement per se, or growing a bit of power or control, which is often what politically or other religions or in other movements is. It's about growing the power base, and that's not what we're about. We're about love, and that has to be the motivation for evangelism.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to our last podcast about character. I think character of love ultimately is one of the most important things. So you can teach a skill set of evangelism, but yet if it's not grounded in love, ultimately it is going to fail and fail hard, or be of the wrong motive. Yeah. So it's interesting though, because I think you can extrapolate, work backwards. I don't know. Taking an isolated people group who obviously don't want anything to do with us, to let's say a less isolated, but albeit more, let's say, closed off people group or subculture of various parts of society who want nothing. So one could say a group of atheists, right? Or maybe a subgroup of people who go to furry cons, or what, like whatever else. Like if there's a subgroup of people who have in large measure rejected Christ. So maybe it's Muslims, maybe it's Muslims in our cities or whatever else, and they don't want anything to do with it. The question, so I think you can, because for 99% of the people out, maybe 99.9% of the people out there, this one particular people group on an island, we go, I don't care about that. Most people who are listening, I don't want to say don't care about it, but it's not something that's going to affect their life. Yeah. But what do you do with that people group you have in your mind if they don't want to hear about it? So, is it right for me to enter into that group or to tell them or whatever else? And so then that becomes a little bit more messy, because it's like, well, they have access to it, but they've clearly rejected it. We can't force ourselves upon them. And, you respect people's choices to an extent. Yeah. And so what do you do in that case? So what do you do in that case? Do we continue to try to make inroads to certain segments of society that have in large measure rejected Christ and made it known we want nothing to do with him? or do we go anyway and in love and grace and truth continue to make Jesus known regardless of the fruits that are born?
Yeah.
So no one's going to die, but maybe you're just social rejection and not going to see quote unquote fruit.
Yeah. Well, and still a lot of places you can go where you might go to jail or be killed, or, I mean, but I think what we're saying is in a globalized world, there's very few of these places that exist where there's no awareness of the outside world.
Right.
So these people, I think, so I think that maybe that makes this case a slight, as I'm spitballing.
Yeah, that's true.
Slightly different in a way. I mean, and I think there are still people groups that are very unreached, but they're connected into the world in some way, right?
Right.
And so one is that they're on an island, so they've been able to a remote island that's been able to maintain for a long time isolation. So that's one thing that's very rare. Okay. Another thing is the Indian government has said, we've made the decision to protect these people, and so no one goes in, no one goes out. So there's a level of, so as Christians, I don't think we're against breaking the laws for the good of the kingdom, right? I'm not against it. I mean, because you go a place where you said we cannot do these things here, right? So, but that makes it also a little bit differently than the situation. So there's some really interesting impediments that maybe aren't as common in other contexts, where there is danger, where there is unknownness. I think if you now, so this is maybe where this might get us in trouble a little bit, but if we remove ourselves from the Christian response, I want to go and play a little thought experiment. Why would we not want these people to have access to medicine? Why would we not want these people to have access to, some things that in modern society are helpful? I understand there's an argument that those things will corrupt or cause more problems, and I think that's a very real argument you have to wrestle with. So I'm not saying not to, but at the same time, is it possible to not have eventually something where they will have to absorb themselves into the real world? And so maybe the argument there is, okay, let's do that, but let's do it well, as opposed to what maybe we've done in the past, which is more exploitation or more not caring for the people. So I guess that's a little too. I wonder if you can play that thought experiment of, let's not even talk about Christianity or faith or anything. Let's just talk about, these are people who are totally cut off from the world. They don't know even the truth that they're actually governed. I mean, they think they're autonomous, but they're not. They're not autonomous. They're actually part of the Indian government. Leaders above them have decided, we're going to allow you to be cut off. And, so they don't even know that. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so in some sense, is there an obligation from a purely secular standpoint of saying, no, you need to understand around?
It's a great question.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. But I know there's probably people on both sides of that argument.
Yeah, and it seems to me that the gospel conversation maybe is a little bit different than the the wider world and government obligation, because the gospel is going to transcend those things.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I'm a missionary, so maybe I'm going to be predisposed to be for making contact. I would say within respect of these people, we don't run roughshod over people.
Yeah.
So I don't know the best way to do all of those things. I just know that it is it's the gospel is good news. And if it's truly good news, then it is for all people in all times and all places. Therefore, with respect and grace, we try to make inroads.
Yeah.
Granted, look, you there are certain things that you have to, I don't know, difficulties that we have to deal with, right? So the Indian government said, leave these people alone. We're gonna we're going to leave them alone, then maybe that's maybe one of the first places to start is trying to convince the Indian government that it's okay to go in rather than completely going around them. I don't know, but anyway.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Yeah.
What do you do with the parts of society? Let's say certain Jewish communities within say New York, who want nothing to do with the outside world as much as possible, and have made it clear as such. Do we have a need or a responsibility to go in under the mandate of the Great Commission?
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, clearly so. I think because I think we're also not in a I think one thing that's problematic about sometimes talking about people groups is people groups are made up of a lot of individuals.
Yeah.
And those individuals are from a theological standpoint are deeply loved by God. So is the people group, deeply loved by God. But it's different to say, well, this people group has said this. Well, okay, yeah, in general, it's a resistant people group. But in a lot of those, I bet you if you poke around, you can find in a lot of those people, in the Muslim world, plenty of people who've said, I want out of this. I want something better than this tight community that has walled itself off from X, Y, and Z, or all this, or just this. And I think from a purely Christian ethical, that's not what we believe. We believe all people have Christian ethical. Is that a word? Ethical? Ethics. In the sense, I think Christian ethics that we believe all people are made in the image of God. All people have the right to decide who they are, not who they are, but have the right to be themselves and to not have to be forced into one mode of looking at God, right? So we believe it's your choice into some sense, right? You are a mover, an autonomous person, and so I think this is the rebellion, but maybe at the core of Jesus' message is like, this isn't about a community controlling and moving towards. This is about God loving individual people, and so I think there's part of that is that in that argument of saying, who died and made you God that you can decide for all these people that they can't, that they're stuck. Now I do think with those communities there's a different approach, right? Obviously, which approach is through love, through building trust, through gradually working into those communities, and it takes time, and it's going to take a lot of research and investigation and a lot of patience. But that was, if you go back and look, that was the story of a lot of missions. Japan, they did not want missionaries there. They did not want them, and they didn't want, it kind of ebbed and flowed, but there were times when it was, really hard to get in there, or in a lot of countries, so this isn't anything new we're necessarily dealing with. I think it's just newer in the sense of we're in a flatter world than before, right?
We are in a much flatter world than before. I think the passing of Queen Elizabeth has reminded me of that, because when you look at the size of the English empire that she saw devolve, decolonization and everything, turning over, how incredibly small the world became in her lifetime. It went from this massive place that, where days and months and years would take to communicate something, to instantaneous, and there's a connectedness there. It's fascinating to think about. It's interesting. It's interesting to maybe that's where technology comes in. So I'm going to rope in a little bit of technology here. Maybe technology, some ways of maybe making sure that we're always communicating with people, is that we can use technological means to have things floating around or targeted in order, the barriers are smaller. Obviously you're not going to send, Twitter to the Sentinelese, but Wouldn't that be funny if they were actually on Twitter? It's like they're completely primitive in every sense, but they've actually got a few cell phone towers and they're all on Twitter. And that's why they don't want anyone to contact them, is because they're like, man, you guys are crazy.
This is nuts.
But anyway, I don't know. It's
parable in there somewhere.
An ultimately small world. That sounds like that could easily be a Saturday Night Live skit. The world has become an increasingly small place, which is incredibly good for the gospel, because in some senses, as communication gets easier, we can contact them. So there is a place for technology. I know that I'm a little bit of a Luddite sometimes on this podcast, but that's where with good reason. That's where technology does come in, and the benefits of it. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say real quick. I feel like there's a strategy there, and sorry, that's also something we don't like to talk about much, but I feel like and I feel this kind of goes back to a conversation we have a lot. One is the need for quick payoff, quick, something to happen. And so I don't want this poor guy's, motivations and what he should and shouldn't have done. I think he probably was a guy who loved Jesus and thought, this is something I can try to do. And I'll, obviously was wisdom a big part of his plan? No, but sometimes maybe that's all right. But let's kind of, remove him from the whole thing. But I do think, if there is one pitfall, and one thing that you and I see a lot in missions, and maybe the listener, is the need for rapid, and maybe this is because we're just getting old, but the need to just get it done sometimes can be our biggest pitfall, because we need to be patient. We need to trust God. We need to trust that He's doing something as well. Like, God hasn't forgotten to sentinel these people. Not at all, right? He knows what's going on. He's got a plan for them. Probably some things we don't even know about, throughout whatever history. Who knows? Maybe a Bible's washed up there, and they, at some point in time. But my thing is, like, there's got to be a way to think this through. This is a hard case study, and I'm sure there people are. How do we do this and do it well, but be patient and trust God and walk step by step to reach these people, and not just go for the big payoff,
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it needs to be slow, methodical, and trust that God is ultimately in control.
Especially when you're crossing cultures.
Well, it's interesting because how much this is I think a lot about anxiety these days, because I've seen how it comes in. I don't mean anxiety in the sense of like I'm afraid to fly sort of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that does produce anxiety for some people, but that maybe could be what I'm talking about. I mean, more like the overall urge to get it done now, and this can be my problem in life, right? So on Strength Finders, I'm an activator, and so this can actually produce anxiety in me, because when I get an idea, I'm kind of like, I've got to do this now, and that's activator. So there's a strength to that, but there's also a little bit of anxiety that gets produced of fear that if I don't get it done, I'm never going to get it done. I think through the consequences, and so that's actually a little bit of in there, even within that strength.
Yeah.
How much of I'm not saying that when we decide to do things missionally that we're driven by anxiety. Not all the time. There's godliness to it. There's godly men and women who are planning things out and strategizing and all the rest. And we've got great leaders who do that. Although sometimes, even within the strength of those things, there can be a certain amount of anxiety that goes in. And I think sometimes within missions or decisions that we take as organizations and leaders and stuff, there can be anxiety behind that, driving that. So like one way of saying that would be like, when as a leader I receive a text message from someone I'm leading at, on the weekend at 11 o'clock at night. Hey, hope you're having a great weekend. Sorry to disturb you, but there's probably sometimes they're legit messages, sort of thing. But sometimes it's just, I'm anxious about this and I've got to get it off my chest. And so I'm going to pass this along to you so that you can deal with it, but then I'm less anxious about it. And that's an anxiety. And so we make decisions, and that causes us to act prematurely. I wonder if sometimes with a situation like this, with contacting people or certain decisions that get made, especially in impetuous youth nature, if it's not, I'm anxious about this, so I've just got to do it now. A lack of patience, like when my son says, "Hey, I need to answer my messages on this social media platform." Well, why is that important right now at this moment in time when it's bedtime? I just have to do it now. There's anxiety that's there that gets produced.
Yeah, I think so. And I think I think there's a generally in particularly American society and certain other societies, there is an impetuousness because there's a sense that things are going quickly, things are happening, and so there and it's all going on right now. And so there is a real I think a problem with that. Time is sped up. There's a new book coming out by James K. Smith, is the correct guy, called How to Inhabit Time. And I have not read the book. He's obviously a guy who talks a lot about secularism and faith and the world we live in. It looks good. What I think is about, right, is this exact same thing. It's like we are more and more as a people becoming disconnected from time and place and space. And that is not a good thing. And so when we and because of that, there is, I think, I'm adding this, I don't think this is what necessarily he's saying, but my guess is it might come out there, is that because of that, there is this, it's got to be done now, and I think for younger missionaries, that's where I would always say is like, no, you can't microwave a movement, something, we can't fast forward missions. There's no fast forward button on the Camino. Like, these things take time, and they take the process of us passing through time and space in a real
3 mile an hour God.
Yeah, in a real way. And so there is this need to, like, I mean, it's something we try to really tell our interns, our stinters, right, who come over for years, like, you're here for a year, nothing. That's from giving God time. Don't expect that God's gonna start a revival and change this country because you're here. I mean, that could happen. Why not? But you've got to be realistic about what you're really capable of accomplishing, what you're really here for within a year or two. And those things take time and take presence, and they take long days of not really feeling like you're doing anything sometimes. But I think that's hard. I think that's hard for some people.
Well, and I think it's becoming increasingly more difficult and unrealistic given social media and the connect. That's one of the downsides of the connectedness, but also it also exacerbates what we think are real issues. Mm-hmm. So, like, let's say, I'm trying to think of an example, but, like, let's say you live in rural Spain, and because of how connected we are, you hear about, let's say you live on one side of Spain and you hear about crime increasing in Barcelona. Mm-hmm. You begin to grow anxious, not realizing that that's so far from me.
Yeah.
I have no reason to worry about that. And we have a million inputs. Or as a Christian, you hear about, let's say, a lost person somewhere, the Sentinelese, but you lose the perspective of what you're responsible for right in front of you at the moment. Yeah. And so you become an anxious person, missing the fact that your neighbor is in front of you rather than, the person millions of miles away. That's not exactly the right analogy, but I think there is a sense there of we're losing a little bit of perspective because there's so much information that's available that somehow we need to declutter the noise of that. By decluttering the noise then, and becoming a less anxious person, and becoming a person who can focus on inhabiting time, right? Then that allows you to look at that island and go, hey, yes, this is important, and yes, time is short because every day that passes, Christ's return is imminent. On the other hand, to recognize, but God is also in control.
Yeah.
And I can rest that there are ways to do this which maybe more God honoring. That kind of brings up the whole Elisabeth Elliot or
the Nate Saint, Elliot, Jim Elliot.
Yeah, they go in and they had a sense of urgency about it, and like, we're going to go do this, and fantastic. I think, but also kind of like, there might have been a few things that they could have done. I'm not being critical of the Elliot story. I think God is faithful and he used it how he used it. But I do think, sometimes I wonder, I don't know how to do that. That's why I'm not God. And that's also why he is gracious and compassionate in all that he does. But I don't know.
I think another thing I'll add on to your, the connectedness, over connectedness, is the social media, the media, they benefit by never resolving anything. Like if you really notice this, what happens, we're in this constant cycle of big issue problem, which is and often important issue. So I'm not saying which one group goes, this is the most important issue, another group goes, that's because this thing, and then within 3 weeks it's gone. It is literally. Now I realize that on a local level and in certain areas people are still working on that, but in our minds as a global audience, right? I'm gonna say audience because we're being primed as an audience. In our minds, this is never resolved, and so we get upset or we get apathetic about things that really are way outside of our control and abilities, and really which we have like why do I care about Canada's political system? Like 30 years ago, you and I are old enough to remember. No, we wouldn't know that much about Canada. Or California, right? And California is a big deal right now because in Texas, all these Californians are moving. So
just threw all our Canadian listeners under the bus.
But you know what I'm saying is like that's their thing. Like that's their problem.
Yeah.
But now everyone's got an opinion. So like you have to have an opinion or an emotion tied to everything that happens all the time. But it's never resolved. So I've got to have an opinion about, Canada. Why? I'm not Canadian. But what if everyone's got, when there's a school shooting in Texas, everyone's got an opinion about Texas. Usually it's wrong, but it usually is and I realize, oh, well, if I'm having opinions about Canada, I'm probably wrong because I've never been there. I don't know many Canadians, but the Canadians I have met are really sweet, nice people. But that's about all I know. They're good at hockey. I know a few things, but I don't know that much about Canada. I know more about Mexico because we live in shadow of a Mexican relationship with Texas and the Southwest. And, but everyone's got an opinion about things that they don't know anything about. It's just, and then we don't resolve it and no one learns anything. And then we just keep going to the next big problem or the next thing I need, and so it's fascinating that cycle. It seems like so many people are kind of caught in that. And that's what pays the bills, right?
Yeah. Right.
Pays the bills for CNN, whoever.
So does it pay the bills for Christian literature?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's just something I'm asking the question. I'm not. I don't have an idea in my head. But is some kind of. I don't know.
I don't know.
Maybe you're like, did you have to go there, Barrett?
There's there's definitely weird. There's some interesting.
No, I'm just asking. I'm just asking
that are like on both sides of the evangelical or Christian spectrum. There's like really weird kind of snake oily kind of conferences that get propped up. So someone's making money by doing some type of narrative.
Yeah, right. There's narrative building and.
Yeah,
and that sort of thing.
But like, what are you actually doing? Like, besides throwing conferences where you speak about things that I don't know. It's weird. It's just weird to me.
Conferences in and of themselves. This is a side, maybe not a side. Conferences in and among themselves, because it's not solely unique to Christians to one.
No.
But are a testament to the fact that we are social beings who want to congregate. Like we just want to be together.
And we want answers.
Yeah. Yeah, and we were created. Well, we were created for answers. We were created to solve problems. We were created to be industrious and creative and communal, right? And so that endeavor, which actually gives me, this is a very, very much an aside point, but anytime I feel overly negative about the human race, or I don't know, you pick any issue under the sun, global warming, end of peak oil or whatever else. I'm actually starting to be somewhat positive on that, because the tendency among humans is to put our heads together to solve problems, right? And so eventually we do that, and I think that kind of explains why, okay, we're created in the image of God. God is communal, relationships, creativity, all of those things. It all goes together. To that end, then I think that we are better off in situations where we have isolated or any people group that we would desire to reach, rather than doing it alone, doing it in arms and arms with people and thinking through, because it's not the diversity of race or perspective or whatever that solves the problem, but rather just the diversity of human thought and working together, that God's created us to put our minds together to solve problems. We often don't do that very well. So I'm not saying that the process is always leads to the perfect solution, because oftentimes it leads to a less than subpar solution. VHS versus beta. Everyone knows beta was better, but VHS won out. So anyway, I don't know. I've just heard that in a conversation one time. So anyway, so I do think that it's important.
So I think if there's some lessons here, and once again, I don't want to cast judgment on this guy, but I think if we're looking at two things, number one, if you're, as a missionary, number one, be patient. Like, I think there's just something about patience is necessary in missions, and then go in a team. Don't go by yourself. Don't think you've got, and I see a lot of solo missions. I see a lot of people who are like, well, I'm just going to go do it. They rarely get very long, because you need help. You need the backing of somebody. You need, I'm not saying you can't go to another country, get a job and live your life there and share your faith. I think that's great. But if you're going to say, I'm part of an enterprise that's trying to do something, but I'm going to just do it all by myself, like I'm going to start a church for myself, that's you're not going to do it. It's not going to happen. You need help. You need a team. You need people. So that may be the other thing to kind of learn from this. Don't go by yourself unless you're sent. They said, well, you're the only one who can do it, but you've got an organization or a church or someone behind you going, we're behind you. Well, when the rubber hits the road, we'll send in the cavalry or whatever it is. And I just use a bunch of metaphors, mixing metaphors.
Yeah, interestingly enough, one of the fruit of the spirit is necessary for missions. How fascinating.
Yeah.
But I mean, patience, right? Patience, wisdom.
And I feel like all the missionary biographies I read, a lot of patience. I mean, even you go back to the Elliots, the Saints, that whole group. Well, that was a lot of patience. I mean, they lost their husbands, and they
kept plugging along,
kept plugging away at it. That's a whole heck of a lot of patience. I would have pulled out.
Yeah,
I would have never gotten I would have never been in a situation where I would have, and I'm saying that in detriment to myself. I don't have the bravery necessarily to put myself in a situation where I might get killed. So thank God for people who are willing to take those risks.
Yeah. I wonder if they're increasingly. So this kind of is maybe in honor of this. Is it John Chow? Of him. There aren't too many people who are cut from that cloth anymore.
Yeah.
Thankfully, we don't have to be cut from that particular cloth so much anymore because of the connectedness of the world. But I'm just not sure that there are those who would fully. I mean, you got to give it to the guy. He counted the cost. He was like, "No, I'm going because it's worth it. Jesus is worth it, right?" And that's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah.
I had another question for you, which was totally off topic, and I have completely forgotten it. I know. Okay, so here we are, 2022. We can close on this for the next 5 minutes or so. 2022. COVID is still with us. Obviously, will never go away.
Yeah.
I don't want to say we were right, but how are we feeling, Garrick?
Yeah, I feel good about our. I think I'm going to give a lot of credit to you for reading that book on the flu pandemic and just seeing how remarkably similar 100 years ago was to now, and how the humans will we figure it out, we move forward. It wasn't the end of the world. It was fairly grand nuisance in everyone's lives, and unfortunately for a lot of people lost their life or faced incredible health issues. So, but I mean, as I look at it, life has pretty much returned to normal. People are going back to work en masse or being forced to. There's a few, the Chinese still haven't figured this out. They're still having trouble, but pretty much everywhere else in the world, I think, things are good.
Do you think that there are what do you so in the beginning there was a lot of conversation about pivoting, right? Pivot. So everything's gonna be, the future is here. This is gonna be the catalyst that helps us change, and we'll never go back to conferences and this, that, and the other thing. We have a mutual friend who does a lot of speaking in the Latin American world, and I've been following on Facebook lately, and conferences he's going to are pretty packed. And there's a lot more, say, Zoom meetings, online conferences that you can be a part of because people utilize those things. But do you think that there are any, let's say, full pivots that we made that are there any that you're, because look, I mean, okay, to an extent, we're right. I mean, we felt like it'll go back. People are people. We've always kind of been that way. We have a desire for community. We're going to mostly go back to the way things were. But what are the vestiges of, or what are the pivots that remain, or the half pivots that remain?
That's a good question. I think you and I our biggest beef was there was some articles written about how it was the end of the university or something like that. Like, right? I think that was, some guy did go for that, and obviously that's not. I just my oldest daughter just started university, so she's having a great time. It's but it's the university experience. So I think we were very much so. So the question, that is a really good question, are there some pivots that that are here to stay? I do think what you said is that there's a little bit more emphasis on needing to be present digital and even be digital. But I had a really fascinating conversation with a good friend of mine who's an executive pastor of a very large church, who quickly pivoted very well online, and for good reason, and did a great job. Fantastic. And his thing was, but it wasn't the be all end all. It was something you had to do, but it did not unlock the cheat codes, right? That was kind of what it was like. This is it. And he said, his point was, I've been in ministry long enough. I've seen a lot of trends. I've seen there's always this need to say, this is the thing that's happening. This happens, kind of cyclical with generation that come in. This is now the new thing. And his takeaway was, look, he goes, you can't tell people no, because basically his thing was like, we're spending a lot of money on production, right? Probably too much money on production, because if you want to compete, you have to put money in production. So there's a lot of money, time, effort that goes into that. he goes, you can't tell people no. He said you have to learn to ask the right questions. And I thought that was really interesting about this whole conversation we've had about pivoting to, it's like, I think maybe in some of this, our era was we come, maybe in some of this stuff we might have come off a little bit too brazen, too rebellious, and whereas we just needed to ask some good questions that make people go, oh yeah, okay. I don't know. No one was really talking to us during the thing. Anyway, we were just talking to ourselves.
Who wanted our opinion?
No one wanted anyway. But I don't know if big. What do you think? What do you think?
I think, like anything, I think we sift out the stuff that works. So what I'm observing in life is that when big changes happen, they're the first adopters who declare it the cheat code, right? And so we're swinging the pendulum one way. And so in a crisis situation like with the pandemic, many people will feel the even peer pressure to go, okay, this is what I've got to do. And they put all their money into that and everything else. And then as things begin to settle, it's kind of like a sifter. It's like the bigger chunks that are more important will remain, and the stuff that maybe wasn't so important kind of get sifted out. So I think, you've probably got a lot more churches who found some ways for their church to utilize Zoom in some creative ways, or university ministries that say, we're going to do this workshop, or we've got this guest speaker who's going to come, hey, let's do a Zoom thing this week. And people who can join, or we're going to do maybe Cru, can do a nationwide Zoom thing about missions or whatever else. It's kind of like, hey, that really worked. And we got, 700 people on, where we would have had to do 5 different meetings, in 7,
some efficiency.
Yeah. So there's some efficiencies that get there, and a willingness, but I think we're sifting out kind of the things that are like, oh, that's good. But then I think you've got, ultimately what you've got is, in some situations, you've got the people who want to pull it back all the way over to the other side and go, okay, now, so like, companies that require presence 5 days a week, where maybe they really didn't need to do that. You had, some people were pretty happy working from home, and maybe we're up in productivity, but, just different stuff. So I think there's still a sifting going on. And ultimately, maybe that's what we were trying to express the whole time, is like, hey, just let some stuff settle here. You'll be able to figure it out. But at the end of the day, I think we as people, you can change the mode of our communication, but we desire to be with each other. We desire to, so you sent me the link to the faith deconstruction conference that's going on. And it's kind of like, that seems like the most least deconstruction-y thing you could possibly do. It's like, let's together and process about how to go upon your own way to find your own faith. So it's kind of a certain amount of irony there, but at the end, all that highlights is we as people, we're communal, and we like to be together, and we need people to process and be in community with. So as long as you take that as your principle, you're going to be able to figure things out. And why there's such a quick desire to atomize everything and say, this is what's going to be, we're going to be strict individuals and atomize everything. It's like, well, maybe we still want to be in community. So anyway, I don't know, some quick thoughts. Nothing's set. But I think overall,
I think what we certainly learned was, without a doubt, I mean, all the evidence is that online education for children is horrendous.
Terrible.
It is literally the worst thing you can do to a kid. I'm not saying that you can't have something on that, but which Europe figured out very quickly. This is not going to work. Let's get people in the country as soon as possible. I think I wonder sometimes how much of the whole this is the way things are going to change was driven a little bit by naivete, obviously, and maybe in the Christian world, but naivete on how things really work, and lack of theological kind of reflection. But I wonder also on the other hand is this, kind of the wider, broader movement of trying to move everything into a digital experience. Like we're going to live in a digital world. I mean, there's that movement. It's not super big, as most people I think are like, well, I don't want to move. I want to, but there is a group of people who are moving that. That's where the future is. We'll all be plugged into something, matrix. I don't think we're going to get to that. I'm not, but I think there's some people who's foresee that, and to them this was this opportunity to to go on, somehow, like some of the cryptocurrency. There's been moments where it's like this,
right.
This is the future.
Right.
But the people, processing that the most are the people who have the most to gain at the same time,
right.
by making those things. But yeah, by and large, I can't think of anything right now, at least in Spain or the US where I've been, where people aren't living their lives 100% normal. Aside from every once in a while putting on a mask because you're concerned about this environment, or you go into a hospital or a bus wearing a mask, which that's going to end eventually as well. We're not going to have that restriction forever. It's just still because people are worried about there could be another spike, and so you're trying to protect lives. So
right.
But I just literally all this air travel will change forever. All these articles I remember reading in the first year. I was like, well, no, it's like I'm flying as much, and I flew a lot during the pandemic.
Well, and there's an example of how there are reasons for this, but Europe didn't swing the pendulum as hard as America did. And again, there were structural reasons for the way American companies and European companies are made, and laws and different stuff like that. But Europe has had some trouble with flights. I mean, Amsterdam airport still has 3-hour waits for security and different stuff like that.
Yeah.
But by and large, Europe didn't have the same flight disruptions this summer as America had, because they didn't furlough as many people, or as many people didn't walk away, because jobs are a little bit harder to come by in Europe. And so if you have the opportunity to say, well, maybe my job will come back, you stick with it. And I would say Spain is more, maybe jobs are harder. Other Northern European economies are maybe a little bit more flexible. So anyway, so I just think, that's kind of there's two different stories to realize that are going on there. And we kind of straddle both of those. But
we're not all strapped into like body suits with a mask, and we're not only letting like the the elites fly. It's back to normal, and there's these kind of projections of like, well, you're never going to go on a vacation again, kind of things.
Right.
It's just not safe.
Right.
It's like, well, everyone, their grandmothers in Europe right now.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, you're only going to do staycations from now on. It's like I only saw pictures of people in airports this summer. So, well, anyway, okay. So
anyway,
I brought that up not to say that only that we were right, but rather there are some leadership and spiritual principles that are at play there, which I think are important to remember. So the next time something happens, let's just settle down, people. Don't pivot.
We'll get through it.
You're going to make yourself dizzy with how fast you pivot. Well, in memory of Josh Chow, who I think was a person who loved people and wanted to see them know Jesus, which is not a terrible thing. So give the guy a break. May we always do missions better and make Jesus known more authentically.
Amen.
And also pivot. Sorry. God, I couldn't resist. Great talking to you. Until the next time we chat. Have a great life.
Have a great life.
Until next time. We'll talk to you later, buddy.
All right, man.